The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers that cast their golden glow across the room. Rows of uniforms filled the seats, the sound of metals clinking and boots shifting echoing in the background. Tonight wasn't an ordinary evening. It was the annual military gala where generals, colonels, admirals, and their families came together to honor service, sacrifice, and the unseen bond of discipline. The air was thick with respect and pride, though somewhere in the corners. Beyond the tables filled with wine glasses and polished silverware stood the staff, quietly blending into the shadows as they carried trays. Refilled water glasses and swept up crumbs no one else noticed. Among them was Alina. She was in her late 40s, her brown hair streaked with gray, tied back into a neat bun. Her uniform wasn't decorated with ribbons or stars, but instead with the plain navy blue apron and crisp white blouse she wore every evening shift at the hotel. She wasn't meant to stand out. She wasn't meant to draw attention. She wasn't even supposed to be seen, and she knew that well. She kept her head down as she quietly swept near the side of the room, her eyes catching brief glimpses of the glittering crowd. At the front of the room stood General Marcus Donovan, a man whose reputation preceded him. His broad shoulders carried decades of service, stern jawline told stories of discipline, and his chest displayed medals that spoke of bravery most could only imagine. He was a legend among soldiers, feared by some, admired by many. Tonight, he was the keynote speaker, and as he stepped up to the podium, the crowd silenced. His voice boomed across the room. "Discipline," he said, his tone commanding, each syllable sharp and deliberate. "Discipline is the cornerstone of honor. It is what separates chaos from order, weakness from strength. Without it, the uniform is just fabric. With it, the uniform is a promise." The audience leaned in, hanging on his words. Alina, though sweeping quietly by the far wall, found herself stilled by his presence. His words reminded her of something, though she quickly shook the thought away. She had no business listening to generals, no business letting their world touch hers. But then it happened, as General Donovan continued. His eyes suddenly shifted, not toward his fellow officers, not toward the families of soldiers, not toward the stage crew, but toward the staff in the back, toward the cleaning crew. Cordelina, his piercing gaze locked onto her with a weight that made her freeze. Then, without warning, his voice thundered with a command that none of the officers, none of the families, none of the polished dignitaries understood. It was sharp, foreign, not in English, but in a clipped, precise language that carried weight and urgency. Everyone in the ballroom looked around, confused. Whispers fluttered among the officers. What had he just said? What was that? Was it code? Was it some forgotten order from the field? The silence was palpable. And then, to everyone's shock, Alina dropped her broom. Her back straightened instantly, her shoulders squared, and in one swift, perfect motion, she snapped to attention. Her heels clicked together, her chin lifted, and her arms locked to her sides. Stood, like a soldier in formation. Gasps echoed across the room. Some thought it was a mistake. Some thought it was mockery. But the sharpness in her stance, the perfection in her posture, silenced any suspicion. General Donovan's eyes narrowed then, softened almost imperceptibly. At ease, he barked again, and Alina, without hesitation, moved seamlessly into a stance of readiness, her every motion precise, drilled, rehearsed thousands of times in another life. The ballroom was stunned. Who was this woman? Like fire, she understood him. She responded, "She's one of us." The general stepped away from the podium, his boots echoing against the polished floor as he approached her. The crowd parted, giving him room. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but her body betrayed no fear, no hesitation. Her eyes, once lowered in submission, were now sharp, alert, burning with something long buried. "Name, General Donovan," demanded, his voice low but commanding. "Alina Morales, Sergeant First Class, retired," she answered, her voice steady, her accent still carrying traces of her upbringing in Puerto Rico. But her tone all soldier. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. She had been a soldier? She was a cleaning lady. The general studied her, his expression unreadable. "You served?" "Yes, sir," she said, her words clipped with discipline. "United States Army, 1992 to 2008. Honorably discharged." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. The weight of her revelation pressed down on everyone there. A cleaning lady, invisible to the glittering crowd of uniforms, had once stood among them, had once worn the same honor, had once carried the same weight of duty. But why was she here? In this life, sweeping floors while they stood adorned in medals and stars? General Donovan seemed to ask himself the same question. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened, and then, for the first time that night, his tone softened not as a general, but as a man. "Then why are you here, Sergeant?" Elena's eyes glistened, but she didn't break her stance. "Because life doesn't salute you after the uniform comes off, sir. It forgets you." The ballroom fell silent again. Some lowered their eyes in guilt. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew her words carried truth. Veterans were honored in words, but in reality, too many were forgotten once the uniform was folded away. General Donovan's gaze lingered on her as though he could see every battle she had fought, not just on foreign soil, but here, at home. And for a moment, the indomitable general looked almost human. But the story didn't end there. Because beneath Elena's quiet, resilience was a past even deeper, one that the general himself didn't yet realize was tied to his own history. A past that had brought her into this room not by chance, but by fate. And as the whispers of the gala grew louder, as questions filled the air, as reporters in the crowd quietly scribbled notes, the first spark of a story that would shake the entire military community had just been lit. The air in the ballroom felt heavier after Elena's words. General Donovan stood before her, but his usual aura of absolute authority had been shaken. For years he had drilled men and women into warriors, had barked orders that were followed without question, had lived in a world where honor was worn on the chest. Yet here was a woman who had worn the same uniform, carried the same honor, and now stood before him invisible to the world until he spoke a command most hadn't. Understood, the crowd couldn't stop staring. The elite, the powerful, the ones who believed they were untouchable, suddenly they realized the woman sweeping their crumbs had stood in the same trenches, faced the same enemies, and endured battles they could never imagine. A colonel at one of the front tables leaned toward his wife and muttered, "This is embarrassing." His wife shot him a warning look, but he wasn't wrong. They all felt the shame of not recognizing her, of not seeing the soldier behind the apron. Alina, however, didn't flinch. She remained standing tall, the discipline of years past running through her veins once more. But inside, her chest tightened. Memories she had locked away came flooding back, the heat of deserts, the smell of dust and gunpowder, the sound of helicopters slicing through the sky, and one memory sharper than all the others. One she had spent years trying to bury. The general studied her for what felt like an eternity. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "Sergeant Morales, dismissed." She replied quietly but firmly, "With all due respect, I've been dismissed for a very long time already." The words cut through the air like a blade. Gasps rose from the crowd again. But General Donovan didn't respond with anger. Instead, his eyes softened, a flicker of something regret, recognition, pain passing across them. He gave her the smallest nod, as though acknowledging a truth even he couldn't deny. As he walked back toward the podium, the room buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously, commanders exchanged glances, and even the servers carrying trays slowed their pace, caught in the tension of the moment. But Alina didn't return to sweeping. She quietly picked up her broom and left the ballroom, disappearing into the service hallway without another word. That should have been the end of it. A strange, startling moment that would be remembered, as gossip over champagne glasses and whispered about in military circles. But it wasn't the end. Later that night, when the gala ended and the generals and officers climbed into their sleek cars, General Donovan found himself standing by his vehicle, staring off into the distance. His driver cleared his throat, but the general didn't move. His mind was elsewhere on her, on Elena Morales, on the language he had barked, one he hadn't spoken in years, and on how perfectly she had responded. It wasn't random. It couldn't be, said Command Sharp. Specific wasn't just any order. It was one his special unit had used overseas, a phrase buried in classified operations, a phrase not every soldier even knew. Only a handful did, and Elena Morales had been one of them. The next morning, Elena arrived at the hotel as usual, her uniform pressed, her apron tied neatly. She kept her head down, avoiding the curious stares of her coworkers who had heard what happened the night before. She tried to lose herself in a routine, dusting, vacuuming, polishing glassware, but her thoughts drifted constantly back to the general's eyes, to the weight of his gaze, to the ghosts his words had awakened. Around noon, as she was scrubbing the marble in the lobby, a shadow fell over her. She looked up and froze. General Donovan stood there, not in his dress uniform this time, but in a simple, dark suit. He looked out of place in the luxury of the hotel's lobby, too sharp, too commanding. Like a lion walking into a parlor. Sergeant Morales, he said. Her co-workers stopped what they were doing, pretending to busy themselves while their eyes flicked toward the scene. Elena stood, her heart thundering in her chest. I told you, sir, she said quietly. I'm retired. I didn't come here to give orders, Donovan replied. His tone was softer than the night before, but it still carried that weight of command that seemed impossible for him to shake. I came to ask you something. She hesitated. What could a general possibly want from a cleaning lady? He didn't flinch. The truth. Her hands tightened on the cleaning cloth. The truth doesn't change anything. Maybe not, he admitted, but I need to hear it anyway. She shook her head and turned back to her work. But Donovan didn't leave, stood there, waiting, silent but relentless, just as he had been with soldiers under his command. Finally, with a sigh, Elena set down the cloth and looked at him. Why now? She asked bitterly. Why do you care now, when nobody cared then? When I came back from the war, when I tried to find work, when I begged for help, no one cared. Not my commanders. Not my country. Not even myself. And now suddenly, because I remembered one order, I matter again? Her words hit him harder than any battlefield strike. He had no answer. Because she was right. Still, Donovan didn't retreat. I don't know why you're here, he said after a moment. I don't know why you left the army, but I know. You weren't supposed to disappear into the shadows. Soldiers like you don't just vanish. If you did, it means something went very wrong. Something I should have known about. Lena's eyes filled with unshed tears, but her voice remained firm. You can't fix the past, General, no, he said. But maybe I can fix what comes next. She looked away, torn between the part of her that wanted to stay hidden and the part of her that still, after all these years, carried the discipline, the honor, the fire of a soldier. And that's when Donovan said something that broke through her defenses. I remember you. Elena's head snapped up. Her breath caught in her throat. He went on. It was years ago. Operation Iron Falcon. We were ambushed. I was pinned down. A soldier dragged me out under fire when no one else could get close. I never saw her face. But I remember her voice sharp, commanding, telling me to keep moving. That voice was yours. Her chest tightened. Memories of that day rushed back, the chaos, the screaming, the dirt in her teeth. The weight of Donovan's arms slung over her shoulder as she pulled him to safety. She had saved his life, and yet afterward, there had been no medals, no recognition, just silence. You didn't even know it was me, she whispered. No, he admitted, but I never forgot, and now that I know, I can't stay silent. Elena turned away, her face crumpling as she fought the tears threatening to break through. Years of invisibility, years of swallowing her pain. Years of sweeping floors while others wore stars on their shoulders. It all crashed down on her.
Ow.
She allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't forgotten after all. But what neither of them knew was that this encounter would spiral into something far bigger than recognition, far bigger than medals or apologies. Because the truth of Elena's story and why she had disappeared into the shadows was tied to secrets that could shake the foundations of the military itself, and those secrets were about to surface.